If you love our crypto content or are looking to learn even more about crypto, be sure to check out and subscribe to our new YouTube channel after this video dedicated to all things crypto. Find new videos every week. Be sure to check the link in the description. Professor, it's truly a pleasure to have you here today. You're a truly distinguished cryptographer, mathematician, computer scientist, a professor at MIT, founder of Algorand and co-creator, or I guess co-discoverer perhaps is the better way of phrasing it, of zero knowledge proofs. Welcome to Real Vision.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Ash, to you and to your audience. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yes, thank you so much. And I know this is going to embarrass you a little bit, but for our friends who are on the finance and economics side, I want to tell a little bit about your background. You're a National Academy of Sciences and National Academy of Engineering member, a winner of the Gödel Prize, the RSA Award for Excellence in Mathematics, and you've won the Turing Prize, often referred to as the Nobel Prize of Computing, with Professor Shafiq Goldwasser, a truly distinguished academic career, in addition to the things we're going to talk about here today.
You are too kind.
So, Professor, let's talk a little bit about your journey into the Bitcoin space, which I think is one of the most interesting stories. You've spoken about how you succumbed to Bitcoin and how you locked yourself in your office for a few months with your MIT colleague, Professor Nikolai Zeldovich, thinking, this is just too good to be true. This Bitcoin algorithm, too good to be true. We're going to try to break it.
Well, yes. So first of all, I was in my ivory tower mode, right? So I try not to be distracted by too many things. But at this point, the Bitcoin popped up here and there. Everybody was talking about. So finally, I succumbed, as you said, and I asked my student, okay, explain to me Bitcoin. And I was immediately two things struck to my mind. First, I loved the vision, the idea, the whole thing. It really was fascinating. But the second thing is it looks a bit too complicated machine, maybe not as elegant a solution as possible. So, as you said, I locked myself up and says, well, criticizing is easy, doing things is always harder. What I would do? And so it takes me a few months, and then finally I re-emerged with an initial design. And then where I started discussing with Nikolai, and then Nikolai says, well, this is all theory. Do you mind if we test it? Now, Nikolai is the best system engineer that you can imagine. And I said, why should I mind it? No, let's test it. So we rented some 1,000 servers, big servers from Amazon to simulate all kinds of traffic. And after a while, somehow the experiment seemed to confirm the theory. So then at that point, it says, oh, you know what? There is a technology, there is an experiment, the technology is tested. Well, how about now we start a company? That was really the idea. Because I must say, as a cryptographer, I always feel frustrated with how late our ideas and innovation come to the marketplace. This time I decided I throw my hat in the arena, whatever happens, I'm going to do it rather than waiting for somebody else to do it.
So, and that brings us actually to Algorand, which is, you literally started this at your dining room table. Tell us a little bit about your thought process, how you worked into that. It's a truly novel structure, a truly novel blockchain. Give us a little bit of a background for, first, what you saw the need was and why you thought this is something that really needs to exist.
Sorry for interrupting your video, but I have an important message to share. At Real Vision, we pride ourselves on providing the very best in-depth expert analysis available to help you understand the complex world of finance, business, and the global economy. So if you like what you see on Real Vision's YouTube channel, that is just the tip of an iceberg. You should come over to realvision.com and see how we are not leaving any stone unturned, from publishing more in-depth videos, live discussions, written reports, and our latest feature, The Exchange, where you get a chance to engage with experts and fellow subscribers and learn from everyone's experience. It is an experience which you live and you learn from. So if you go to the link in the description or go to realvision.com, it costs you just $1. I don't think you can afford to be without it.
It's a truly novel structure, a truly novel blockchain. Give us a little bit of a background for, first, what you saw the need was and why you thought this is something that really needs to exist.
Well, I must say that, after I saw the design of Bitcoin and already the reaction that we discussed before, I also learned about the Buterin blockchain trilemma, that states that no blockchain can be simultaneously decentralized, secure, and scalable. And so whenever I find something is claimed impossible, nothing excites my imagination more than impossibilities. Because I want to share with you and your audience two fundamental truths. One is that there are impossible things in life, which, by the way, is what gives life depth and meaningfulness. But the second thing, which is also good news, is that the impossible things are much fewer than we think they are. Okay, so I thought that let's see what is so hard about it, and somehow I found a perfect setting for all my recent studies. I'm a cryptographer indeed. I spent many years doing that. My first PhD thesis that I granted was in distributed computation and Byzantine Agreement. And my latest years, I was conducting research on mechanism design, which is a branch of economics that deals with mechanics and the architecture of incentives.
Professor, if you wouldn't mind, if you could tell the audience, for people who don't know what the formal academic definition of Byzantine fault tolerance is and why that's so important in these distributed cryptographic systems.
Terrific. What perhaps is right now, what is very easy is to spread communication, right? So we live through this revolution that all of a sudden, not only our friends, we can reach everybody with a viral message. But there is only one problem. When I receive a message, I have no idea if you receive it too. So communication and messaging is easy. Common knowledge to realize what we really, both you know, I know that you know, and you know that I know, etc., etc., etc. So that common knowledge is actually very hard. So Byzantine Agreement is essentially a communication protocol. A bunch of people have some values in their head, say it's raining or it's snowing or whatever the value is, or a numerical value. And what do we want to do is that we talk, and at the end of a conversation, two properties are occur. One, everybody agrees on the same value. And by the way, if just in case everybody started with the same value, not only we agree on a common value, but we agree on the very value that everybody started with, right? So that is essentially, it takes a while to convince ourselves that that's what we need. By the way, in blockchain is very important to know what the next block really is, to achieve agreement on what the next block is. And in Bitcoin, as a very ad hoc mechanism to reach agreement on a common block. And in Algorand, instead, we do it in a totally different way. We reach a Byzantine agreement on the block, and therefore our chain never forks, because the way essentially Bitcoin works is that I propose a block. If you agree on my block, then you append your block to mine. Somebody else will append a block to yours. It's voting. I agree on Ash's block. And by the way, I also agree on Silvio's block and all the blocks that precedes. So after you see that a block has been agreed to, voted upon, a vote of confidence by more and more blocks, it becomes more and more and more probable that this block is here to stay, and we are not going to change our mind on it. In other words, we have agreed on it. In Algorand, we take a different approach. We agree by doing a Byzantine Agreement protocol on each block, and therefore we never change our mind, and our chain never forks. And so what the Byzantine Agreement is the strongest notion of agreement in presence of bad people. And what can these bad people do? They can tell you one thing and me something else altogether. So they can lie, they can cheat, they can do anything. But if somehow the majority of the participants are honest, then there is all the good people at the end of the conversation, they agree on a single block, on a single value. And that is really a very, very robust property. Exactly what was needed in blockchain. Unfortunately, Byzantine Agreement, which was a notion proposed in the 1970s, it was also very robust, but very slow to achieve. So much so, defines law, the maximum number of any practical application requiring Byzantine Agreement allowed 12 participants. 12, in an internet protocol with possibly billions of participants, it doesn't even make sense. So we have to reinvent at Algorand a totally new approach to Byzantine Agreement that guarantees on the nose the original definition, and is so fast that we can achieve it actually in a second or two, even though there are a fantastic number of participants.
Yeah, and that's what's so fascinating. One of the things that we try to do here at Real Vision is to translate the computer science into the practical real-world applications. For people who have been following Bitcoin, for example, they know that very often you have to wait for 2 or 3 block confirmations to be certain that you have transaction finality. But what's so interesting about this, settlement finality, transaction finality, the idea being that you know with a very high degree of certainty that the transaction isn't going to change in the future. And Algorand, the algorithm, is designed to do this with a single block.
Yes, because once a payment made to you appears in the new block, you say, oh, EP, finally I've been paid. Well, not quite, because if the chain can fork, and it may be that the block in which what happens when the chain forks, the shorted branch of the chain eventually dies, and possibly your block may disappear with it. So before considering yourself paid, don't just, you don't want to see your payment made to you appear in the latest block. You want to make sure that a second, a third, a 10th block are added to your block, so that it becomes more and more probable that the block in which it is written you have been paid is going to stay in the chain forever. In Algorand, essentially, as soon as a block appears, you have a guarantee that it's going to stay on chain forever. So you can ship the goods right away as soon as you get paid in Algorand. The moment in which a payment made to you in Algorand appears, you can ship the goods you have been paid.
Yeah. So, Professor, I'm a former English major, so you're going to have to bear with me with my rather limited math skills. But I was watching an academic lecture of yours last night where you were talking about the forking infrequency. And I heard you reference something like when someone, I believe, asked, or you were answering the question yourself, how infrequent is infrequent? And you said 10 to the minus 18, which is the number of seconds that have elapsed since the beginning of the universe. Do I have that about right?
You have it right. So when I say colloquially, essentially in Algorand there are no forks, this is a little bit of a stretch of the truth. There is a small probability that Algorand can fork, but this small probability, I decided when we were trying to figure out this is decision that I made unilaterally, how small this should be this probability. I said, hey, we have to convince them that this is small enough. I decided I have an idea. 10 to the minus 18. So 1 divided 10, 18 times. And he says, what is magic about this number? It, as you said, is the number of seconds from Big Bang until now. In other words, if we produce 1 block a second, which is a very good clip, it's going to take the age of the universe before we can see a fork in Algorand. And at that point, I decided maybe this is good enough, at least for me, and certainly possibly for a few generations after that.
A pretty long time scale.
It's a very long time.
One of the other things that's interesting, obviously, Bitcoin is the protocol that most people are familiar with, and sort of the reference that I use for thinking about how to compare things. So one of the interesting things is this, the notion of consensus and how it's achieved. Many of us know it's interesting now. We live in a world where finance folks are talking about computer science terms, and it's not uncommon to hear a finance person say, "Oh, that's a proof of work algorithm." I know that, but you use a kind of proof of stake algorithm that is interesting and novel and something that you developed. Can you talk a little bit about that consensus mechanism?
Yeah. So, by the way, I love proof of work. It's such an original idea, right? So, let me boil down what is the difficulty in any blockchain. Blockchain wants to have a few main properties. One is that, the common knowledge, what I read is the same with what you read, and the same that everybody else reads. What is written cannot be changed retroactively by anybody, cannot be altered. And that is one part. But the difficulty is not in making sure that you cannot manipulate the order of the block or the content of the block. The difficulty seems almost a political one. Who chooses the next block? Because if I choose the next block, I would have more power than any absolute monarch that ever existed, because I would have the power to see these transactions are the transactions the entire world should see, and these other transactions should never see the light of day. Okay. Who chooses the next block? Well, it's not going to be me, it's not going to be you. Nakamoto, Mr. or Mrs. Nakamoto, had this great idea. I say, well, we create a computational puzzle, very hard puzzle, and the first one to find the solution has the right to append the next block on behalf of us, of all of us. So one day I may solve the puzzle first, one day I may solve you first. That is proof of work. It's a great idea, but great doesn't mean that it's perfect. Because what happens is that the difficulty of a riddle is such that it becomes more and more costly to solve a riddle. It requires buying thousands and thousands of supercomputers to have a chance to solve a riddle. And when things become so expensive, fewer and fewer people can afford these expenses, and therefore the system becomes more and more centralized. So, and besides, we waste a tremendous amount of energy that in this day and age is not a cool thing to do. So the next idea was a delegated proof of stake, which essentially means the following. We choose 21 people, and we put them in charge to choose the next block on behalf of all of us, hoping that these 21 people are honest for the foreseeable future. And if you think about it, 21 is better than 1, but it's not decentralized to any real sense, right? Just imagine when in France there was a big revolution because there were millions of disempowered people and hundreds of thousands of nobles, and they consider this too centralized. 21 is very centralized, if you ask me. So what instead we do, if you look at all these prior concepts, they have a very peculiar logic. Essentially means that the whole economy is secure if the majority of a small piece of economy are honest. What does this mean? That's something puzzling. It is puzzling because when you put the entire economy at the mercy of a very small part, you are asking for trouble, if not now, in the foreseeable future. What is the small part of the economy that must be honest for Bitcoin to work? The miners. Now you tell me, in the global GDP, the GDP of the world, what fraction of the global GDP is represented by the miners? You cannot even see it with a naked eye, not even with a magnifying glass. You need really an electronic microscope. In delegated proof of stake, the people that require to be honest are the 21 delegates. Again, they disappear in the global GDP. So what do we do in Algorand? Essentially is the following, is that the economy is represented by tokens, 10 billion tokens, and if the majority of these 10 billion tokens are in honest hands, the system is secure. Put it in another way, who can somehow really destroy Algorand? You need that the majority of the token collude together to destroy the very economy of which they own the majority of. And to me, that is way preferable, and is unlikely. It's way preferable to put all the economy destiny to just a small piece of economy. Essentially, the majority of the economy is the one responsible for keeping the old system secure, not a small part. That's what we call pure proof of stake, and is really the Algorand approach to security in blockchain.
Yeah. I find this absolutely fascinating. On the one hand, because it's so different from the Bitcoin protocol, the idea of eliminating miners entirely from the system is something that I think people who are relatively new, who are thinking only in terms of Bitcoin, probably takes them some time to get their head around. But the sort of the elegance of this system, I think, is also just intriguing. So the idea is if you have 1 billion people out there who are members of the network, and you divide by 1 million, you get 1,000 people that you get randomly elected. And then they, if you can truly make these samples randoms, can vote and be representative of the system. It's a fascinating concept.
Thank you. But I believe actually in the power of randomness. And I think that this notion of randomness is really very powerful, because indeed, if you have 1 billion people, and if you want to select 1,000 at random, and those are the ones responsible for choosing the next block, and the block after, different 1,000 people randomly selected, you're doing quite well. But of course, the question of it, your audience immediately start thinking ahead is to say, well, 1,000 people randomly selected by whom? Right? So that is the idea. And what is at the basis of Algorand is a cryptographically fair lottery, which means it's a lottery that you essentially are guaranteed that not me, not you, not even an entire nation, very powerful and full of supercomputers, can actually change the probability of selecting somebody else. That is really the power of cryptographic randomness. And the technical tool that we use is so-called verifiable random function. That is, I was a co-author with 2 very good friends, some 20 years ago. And I remember, you may be surprised, that we didn't have an application for this verifiable random function back then, but we wrote in the paper, we believe this technology will someday be useful. So now I've been very happy to report that, in fact, has found a use and is really one of the pillars of the Algorand blockchain.
Yeah, and here we are with that technology being relevant. So, but it's really interesting, I think, for people who aren't mathematicians, to understand what randomness truly means, to understand the size and the scale of the address spaces that you look at and draw random numbers from.
So that is actually, that is really fascinating. My PhD thesis was about pseudo-random number generation. And it was a new approach in which can you generate randomness out of nothing? No, because nothing is you can come out with nothing. You can come out evoke an existence from nothing. But what it turns out, what you can do, you can expand randomness. So if you give, for instance, take 300 bits truly random, say by coin tosses, by a very expensive to quantum system, give me 300 bits. And then these 300 bits, if you keep them secret, you can expand them 300 million bits, 300 trillion bits, 300 quadrillion bits, as much as you want, in such a way that if you know all the bits produced so far, and you want to bet what the next bit is, not knowing the initial 300 bits, but knowing the algorithm that expands them, know all the bits produced so far, what is the next bit better than, say, 50.001? The time it takes to predict the next bit with an accuracy better than a half plus 0.01 is essentially the time of the universe.
Right.
And that is very strange because it's a little bit, strange, but we must understand that the number of possibility of initial 300 bits is, of course, 2 to the power 300. Mm. And this number is essentially the number of elementary particles in the entire universe. Right. So not the molecules in the universe, not the atoms in the universe, not the electrons in the universe, but any neutrinos, electrons, protons, any particle you want, all of them are less than 2 to the 300. So in other words, to guess the initial seed is like to say, I thought of an elementary particle in the universe. Which one did I choose? Okay, go to this galaxy. Yes, I go to this galaxy. Go to this sun. Go to the third planet of the sun. There is over there, some grass, a piece of grass. The third molecule on the left, third electron on the right. Did you think of that? No. Try again. Okay, you can see the scale. So it is amazing how it is really a discovery of complexity theory, one of the deep discovery of complexity theory, that you can actually expand randomness. If you're given very little of it, you can expand it at will in a very, very fast using, computers, so you can speed up bits as fast as you can. And these bits are de facto random bits because you are de facto unpredictable in any humanly conceivable time or computation.
Yeah, this is just truly intriguing. And for a non-mathematician like myself, it's difficult to conceive of. But just to give people some idea, and tell me if I get this wrong, Professor, but to understand that this is really all about exponential functions. If I, guess a coin flip, I have a 50-50 chance of getting it right. If you flip that coin 10 times, the odds of me getting all 10 right go to about 1 in 1,000. But if you flip it 20 times, they go to 1 in 1,000,000. So it's this extraordinary idea that with a finite number of different choices, as simple as a coin flip, you can generate this massive amount of randomness, massive amount of unpredictability. Flipping a coin 300 times is something most of us could do in an hour. And yet you generate this potential address space the size of all of the elementary particles in the universe. It's a little bit mind-blowing.
Yes. And I'm saying... it's not for you. I'm saying the first time that I heard this, I had to pause and say, wow, this is an exponential function. I knew intuitively that it grows very fast, of course, right? But once you actually translate it, when just 300 and I had 300 coin tosses, the possible outcomes are as many as the elementary particle in the universe, is mind-boggling. Whether you are a scientist who do this all the time or not, is the first time you realize this is a aha moment for everybody.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. Just absolutely extraordinary. So to get back to a little bit more of the practical applications here and to think about this, and that's what we try to do to bridge the theoretical and the practical. So different mechanism than is used in, for example, Ethereum. There's no confiscation in the Algorand protocol. Tell us a little bit about how that works.
Yes. So when you put essentially in different systems are built in different ways. So one way to say is the following. You have a chance of doing something bad, but I'm going to punish you if you do something bad. That is a way to try to prevent that something bad happens, right? I mean, that is some kind of a design. And I don't find this design convincing. Let me tell you why. Because I believe that the blockchain will... a blockchain that really works due to the transparency, the security, the decentralization, the trust that generates, is going to transform finance. And a blockchain should have under management essentially trillions of dollars. When the stakes are so high, how much can you punish somebody? So essentially you say, well, if you want to be a block producer or a verifier of our system, you must post a large bond. Okay, I post a large bond. Is $1 million enough? Well, $1 million is good, but I would appreciate $1 million. Okay, I post $10 million. Well, I appreciate even better if you post $100 million. Okay, I post $100 million. But you see where I'm going. If all of a sudden I have a responsibility for trillions of dollars, and if I lie or if I misbehave, what I have a risk is $100 million. Wow, that's an opportunity for really bad guys with deep pockets to bribe me with $200 million. Silvio, I know that you're going to lose your bond of $100 million. Here is $100 million to make you whole. By the way, here is another $100 million to make you my friend. Now that you are my friend, do you mind generating for me a couple of $1 billion out of nothing? Okay, so I really believe that the best way is to somehow to prevent something bad to happen with making it impossible to happen without punishing anybody. Isn't that a better system? And I think that that's essentially the route that we take.
Yeah, this also an interesting concept, the idea that when the sums of money at stake are fantastically large, there's simply no amount of bond you can ask someone to post that would not be something that could, in theory, be compensated by a state actor, for example.
Yes, I agree. And I think we should... we see now the convergence, and we are seeing that in Algorand clearly of traditional finance and decentralized finance. And we are going to get, to very significant assets put on chain. And it's so attractive, it's so fast, it's so secure, the costs are so low. You can actually have peer-to-peer transaction, a great security. The value of the blockchains that really will make it is going to be stunning, and we must start thinking about security very seriously, and about the designs that are most adapted to handle these trillions of dollars in value.
Yeah. One of the questions as you're speaking about this that I'm thinking of is that we're talking about the theoretical flaws, the theoretical vulnerabilities in a system, but that's very different from the practical vulnerabilities in terms of a systems engineering perspective. So while we're talking about these enormous numbers, 2 to the 300, 10 to the 90, the practical vulnerabilities may be different. How do you think about making sure the engineering is right to ensure that there aren't sort of fundamental flaws in the system that are a result of human error or improper implementation of a theoretical proof or system?
Correct. Let me tell you another truth which is unavoidable. So errors, we are humans. Error is bound to be with us. Period. We must accept that. However, we should not accept that we remain sleeping or lazy and try to ban it. And speaking of practicality, so I want to make another point. As a cryptographer, right, it used to be that encryption schemes were so bad that it was a bonanza when somebody talked encrypted. Because, wow, now I want to hear the conversation, I decrypt the end of it, okay? And so, but then what happens is that when encryption becomes very, very hard and mathematically sophisticated as it is now, people went back to opening the doors and looking at your file cabinets or in your trash, right? So the good old-fashioned way, before we had the internet, before we had phones even. And so that is actually considered, believe it or not, a sign of the success of cryptography, that people have to go back to the old-fashioned breaking in. Well, now the protocols that are behind some blockchains now are so sophisticated that people no longer attack the protocol. We should worry about that people attack the communication network on which the protocol is run. Because a distributed protocol is a software that runs on a communication network, like the internet. So it turns out, for instance, that you have to be careful, because if in Bitcoin, say, all the miners are honest, all of them. Okay, so these are uncorruptible people. So Bitcoin could actually double spend if you somehow control the communication network and you say, isolate, let's make it up. One continent to make it simple. Out of a 5 populated continent, you isolated one continent for 2 hours, you can double spend with impunity. So that means that when the math is so good, people go to attack network. It's going to be much easier to cut an underground or even undersea cable than to attack the math.
Right.
And we have to watch out for that. So yes, and so at Algorand, we have actually security both at the protocol level and at the communication network level also. So if somebody has total control of the Algorand communication, of the communication network on which Algorand is run, then the most can do is that to stop the production of block for a while until you restore law and order. But when the blockchain starts again, Algorand starts where we left it with nobody losing money. And that is a condition that we were very careful in enforcing, and because we believe it is fundamental. So we have to protect against the protocol errors, we have to protect our protocol attacks, we have to protect against network attacks. But against human errors, I must say, it is, that's why the only protection is to have the best team money can buy. That's one protection. To have open source to enable everybody to inspect our protocols and the way we do things, right? To invite public scrutiny. But, I would be like to say we have found the solution to abolish human error. That is in our nature and will remain with us.
Yeah. And in many ways, the open source community is one of the best mechanisms that we've ever created.
Absolutely. That is amazing. We live in a very interesting world, and the world is becoming more and more cooperative, and open source is really the pinnacle of human cooperation. That's why we believe in open sourcing, all our protocol. There are no black box algorithms in Algorand.
Yeah. We're going to come back a little bit more to Algorand in a few moments, but I want to talk about something else that really kind of blew my mind the first time I heard of it 3 or 4 years ago, which is the notion of zero knowledge proofs, which is something that you and your colleagues created, conceived of some 35 years ago. And it's a difficult concept to get your head around, the idea that you can prove you know something without revealing the thing you know.
Yes. So we live in an interesting world. The world is different than we thought it was going to be. So we thought perhaps for thousands of years, right? So first of all, this notion of a proof didn't change for thousands of years. So the proof, according to Euclid, in 500 BC, and the notion of a proof until even actually Turing himself, 2,500 years later, was essentially the same. And is something that you can write down, and then you can inspect according to some logical rules to make sure that no errors is done. And so somehow, what we thought about is to have a different type of a proof, like a game. And essentially means let me be bothered by writing down the proof. It can be too long. And when a proof is too long, even you can actually get tired and ignore and not notice an error. We play a game. And so in the following spirit, if the theorem is true, I have a simple game that you and I can play. And I say, Ash, the theorem is true. And you say, Silvio, frankly, I'm skeptical. Very good. So we play the game. But you know that if the theorem is true, I have a strategy that allows me to win the game all the time, 100% of the time. If instead the theorem is false, you also know that the probability that anybody, not me, but even the devil himself, could have to win the game is at most 50% of the time. Okay. You are skeptical? Let's play. The game is very, very short. In a fraction, in a millisecond, we can decide who wins or loses. I win. I win. I win. I win. I win. Using your example 300 times in a row. Then you have to draw your conclusion. Either the theorem is false, and I was so lucky to predict essentially 300 coin tosses in a row, or I should have lost half of them at least. So you should have won at least half of the time. So then that is somehow this notion of a proof, interactive proof. And once you have this notion of an interactive proof, when you start, waking sleeping giants, the world looks different, because once the proof, rather than being a static object that you inspect from left to right, becomes a game, then strange properties pop up. And one of these properties that the fundamental intuition, that verification and knowledge are one and the same, is no longer true. You can actually separate them, and you can verify that something is true without having the idea of why that is. And if you tell me that I have 2 minutes, I want to give you an example of this, but it will take 2 minutes.
Please.
All right. So imagine that you have, I'm going to give you an example in which proving is very, very slow. I mean, it can be done in a day, but a day is a long time. But it's the simplest way to understand what is going on. So everybody knows a map, right? I've seen, especially of cities and roads, right? So assume you have 1,000 cities in a country with 1,000 cities and some 10,000 roads who join with cities. Mathematically, this map is called a graph. The cities are called nodes, the roads are called edges. Because mathematicians want to give different names to look special, but actually city and roads make it. It turns out that some maps can be colored with 3 colors, say the patriotic colors, red, blue, and white, in such a way, I want to color the city, red, blue, and white, in such a way no road joins 2 cities with the same colors. Some maps can be colored with 3 colors, and some maps they cannot. If you take, for instance, 5 cities and all the possible roads among them, then you say if only 3 colors to cover a city, there ought to exist one road that joins 2 cities. But if you see 1,000 cities, you think 10,000 roads, can it be colored? Yes or no? You don't know. And that actually is a problem, believe it or not, that is so difficult that it's going to take, thousands of years of computation if the map is, or even at the age of the universe, if the map is large enough and the number of roads is large enough. Okay. So therefore you say, okay, this is non-trivial theorem. I give you a map of 1,000 nodes. I can write it down on a table and all the nodes are there. And I say, Ash, this map can be 3 colored. Say, Silvio, I don't believe you. Very good. So could you please, Ash, leave the room? Okay, you leave the room. What do? I color properly the map, red, Toronto, blue, Washington. Boston, we make it, white. White also New York, because there is no road directly from Boston to New York. And then say, and that's what I do. I put a paper plate, a mini paper plate, so to hide the colors. And I say, Ash, come in. Underneath these paper plates, there is a free coloring of a graph. You say, how do I know? Well, point to any road you want, and I will lift the paper plates. You point to a road, okay? I like to see, you see red, blue, different colors. You say, you believe me? You say, no, I don't believe you. That's one road. I have to inspect all 10,000 roads. Just a second. Go out again, please, Ash, and let me continue. What do I do now? First, I permute at random the colors. So, for instance, what used to be red, I make it blue. What used to be blue, I make it red, and white stays the same. I randomize the colors. I put the paper plate, and when I say, Ash, come again, you point to a road, I lifted different colors. You say, Silvio, so far so good, but it's only 2 trials. Okay, now let's start reasoning about the best process. First, it's clear that it takes a day to do this, say, a few thousand times. But as this proof has a very special property, is a zero-knowledge proof. Why? Because assume that the map is not free-colored. Then, no matter how I color it, there ought to be at least one road between 2 cities of the same colors. Or there is another color, green, that shouldn't be there. Right? Okay. So you have a chance, 1 in 10,000, to pick that one which is badly colored at that point in time, and you catch it. So if you do this 10,000 times, you have actually pretty much, even if there is only one that is badly colored, to find it. If you do it 1,000,000 times, then you have a very good probability to catch it. Okay, so then it's a proof. If for 1,000,000 times you come in, get out, you get tired, your legs ache, whatever. But at the end, you're convinced, most probably it is free color. The question now is, you got convinced that the theorem is true. Do you know the coloring? Let's see. Any time that you come in the room, what happens? You point to a rod of your choice. I lift the plate, and underneath, you find 2 different colors. But not only 2 different colors, 2 different random colors. Because before you enter, whatever was blue, I make it white. Whatever white, I make it blue, and I randomize. So you see, you point to a rod. Now that you're convinced that the theorem is true, say, well, did I learn anything? No. Why didn't I learn anything else? That the free colorability of the map. Because you can simulate this experiment yourself. You can pretend to point at an edge and see blue and red. You point at another edge at another time and you see 2 random colors, white and blue. Can you deduce from this what the coloring is? No. That essentially is, in essence, how you can allow to verify in a very slow way in this example without actually learning, except that the statement is true, but not why. Right. And that it is a very strange theorem that does not hold only for maps, but any mathematical proofs whatsoever can actually be proved in zero knowledge. And that is one of the other, essentially, in our information society, was one of the surprises that we got that in studying modern complexity theory. One of the gifts of complexity theory is to really realize that the proofs are different than whatever we thought they were, or can be done in very different ways. And very fundamental intuition, like having a proof in zero knowledge, is also possible.
Yeah, it's extraordinary that this idea that you could separate verifiability from the knowledge itself was something that didn't exist before the 1980s. This isn't something that's reliant on computational power. This is a theoretical proof that you and your colleagues generated that for thousands of years was unknown to mathematicians.
Yes, but there are certain times in which people usually don't ask the question because the society was different, right? So in some sense, before we really had the computers, all the cryptography was much more an art than a science. But now with the advent of computers, people say, hey, we better shape up and bring this cryptography to the next level. And once we started doing this with my colleague Shafi that you mentioned before, we started advancing cryptography to a point, but then we found a stumbling block. And to say what you want to do is that you want somehow to bound the knowledge that you have in an interaction. So let me tell you why. So anytime that I want to authenticate myself, I used to have a secret key, a secret number that is my unique knowledge, right? So you give me a challenge, I use my secret key, my secret number to respond to your challenge. And we do this over and over again. Now, could I answer your challenge without my secret key? No. But if I am to use my secret key to answer your challenge, do I ever guarantee that my secret key is not going to leak, drip, drip, drip until you actually learn it? Of course, in any cryptographic system, the challenge is not so stupid that say, oh, here is my secret key. But perhaps it gives a distorted image. Think about a shadow projected on a wall of my secret key. And see the shadow from under one light, see the shadow under another light. Sooner or later, you can reconstruct what the key looks like. So we figured out we needed to be sure that continual usage of the same secret key does not betray the key itself. And he said, how do we do that? Well, we had to have this zero knowledge. We didn't need the name. Actually, we invented the concept and the protocol, and we gave the name later. Okay. And I believe actually I suggested the name. Say, hey, if you want a name that says it all, call it zero knowledge proof, and you're done, because that's what it is. Okay, Shafi agreed, we call them that way. but you see, now we had a reason. And very often you say, why this stuff was invented in this age and not 100 years before? Because they didn't have a reason. They didn't have this reason of bounding knowledge. What is the point of bounding knowledge? Well, you want to disseminate usually knowledge as fast as you can and as much as you can. But when you are in cryptography, then the opposite is true. And when you have cryptography, when you have good enough computers, that cryptography becomes possible. And we had the computers, essentially when I was a graduate student, my first computer, I must tell you, were time shared. I typed on one key, and a few seconds later, a character appeared on the screen, that type of thing, right? But they got better, and cryptography caught up. So in some sense, certain things can be explained to have a reason because of the society changes around us, and the scientists, the artists, everybody live in the society they live in, and they want to express different things in the historical moments in which they live.
Yeah, and I imagine that applies to a lot of these concepts that are inherent in this system. Trapdoor functions, zero knowledge proofs, asymmetric public key cryptography, all of these things that why would you have a theoretical use for something that wasn't pragmatically implementable?
Well, I must say that what is true about humanity is that we are never satisfied, and scientists ought to be optimists. So very often you develop a science which is ahead of the technology.
Right.
And that very often occurs. And so somehow and is a little bit of a mystery. So somehow you want to do the theory in the belief that, so I always work on things that I intuitively think are going to be applicable one day.
Interesting.
And so it is a guess, it's a gut feeling. I cannot prove it that it's going to be applicable, but this happened to be the case, right? Like in this Byzantine Agreement, let's say I granted a PhD to a fantastic student of mine, Paul Feldman, now Pesek Feldman, great student, and actually was on Byzantine Agreement, on a new way to do it, but was in some sense the foundation of what I'm doing now, but with another trick. And because I felt that this notion had legs, right? And very often you have, as a theoretician, you have to choose, at least I don't give a recipe to anybody, but my style, let's put it this way, is to choose the problems that are potentially applicable. And if there is something good, people will actually apply later on. And that is a bet, and that beta was actually turned out to be true.
Yeah. It's fascinating to see how many, applications of theoretical mathematics have been applied to particle physics and string theory in the last 25 years, often by your colleagues at MIT.
Yeah, very true. And so I must tell you one thing, but mathematics, it does look magic. So, and certainly the fact that somehow Galileo already a few centuries back said that physics obeys the logic of mathematics was, something totally new at the time. Because they say, of course, there is mathematics, it's a human thing, it stays in our brain. And what does it do with nature? Nothing. But they say, actually, the fact that physical laws obey this mathematical, go according to mathematics, that was really a deep discovery. But even at a more fundamental level, when I was, I want to say subjected, because not everybody loved it, when you start doing Euclidean geometry, right? So there is one of the early theorems you find is the first criterion of equivalence of two triangles. And you say two triangles which had two sides and the angle in between equal are equal. And you go for a proof, right? And you finally realize it. And I remember when I grasped the proof and I really understood and I said, this is amazing because I am here with two triangles. I measured two sides. I measured one angle in between. Did I measure the other two angles and the other side? Not at all. I don't need to. Because mathematics will tell me that they are equal. I say, wow, why? In some sense, I really remember I was, very disturbed and fascinated by the idea that with something which has something to do pure logic, you can actually make assertion about reality in the physical world out there is really amazing. When you become a professional, professional becomes disenchanted. But if you manage to keep the original spirit when you hear it for the first time, is actually nice because it really sounded, mystical. And in some sense, if you remain young in spirit, it is mystical.
Marvelous. The unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics.
Yeah.
And to bring it to something pragmatic, we've talked about this. We've talked about zero-knowledge proofs in the abstract and the theoretical, but this is something that has some real significant practical applications in the real world. Can you talk a little bit about how zero-knowledge proofs are being used today?
Very good. I can give you some very technical ways in which actually is important. But let me give you one thing that is really important, and resonates right away with everybody else. So somehow zero knowledge proofs are the perfect password. Right? Mm-hmm. Password is thousands of years old technology. You say you want to enter a castle as a knight. Say I need the password. And, okay, open sesame. Okay, your heart is true. Come in. Okay, let us say. The type of password had the disadvantage that if an enemy was hiding in the moat of the castle and he was listening open sesame, okay, he put himself in an armor, he arrived, and you say, password, open sesame, he got in too. So you want that a password cannot be learned just by people because you whisper it. So that is, of course, is one point. But there are also additional points that you want. You don't want to have the verifier of the password, nor the password either. So if you are not too different, the two of us are not too different, or at least if you have as bad memory as I have, let's put it this way, I should not make what do I do? Once I took enough time to memorize the same password, I tend to use it again. Okay. So what can happen? I give my password to MIT to say, whoever has this password, right? Let them have access to my file. Let them do this and this. Very good. But if I go to Bank of America and I use the same password, somehow some MIT IT person can go to Bank of America and say, good morning, I'm Silvio Micali. Here is the password. Can I have access to the bank account? Okay. So that is very dangerous. So the notion of a password used to be that you have one verifier and I share the same password. And that's what enables us. But in the pure sense, if you really want to have the highest sense, the best way to identify yourself is through a zero knowledge proof.
Right.
Why? Because I'm going to say this mathematical statement, I make it at random so that I know the solution to it. And so I say, whoever proves this theorem to you is me, let me access to the file. I take the same theorem and I use it for my bank account. Whoever proves this theorem to you, that I give him access to my bank account. I have no risk now. Why? Because a zero knowledge proof, as we discussed, is a proof that you know that the theorem is true, but you don't know why. And therefore, in particular, you not learn how to convince somebody else, because if you don't know why, you cannot repeat the proof to somebody else. The proof will always have a different changing versions. So you don't have to worry about using the same password in this extended sense in different setting. Better yet, if you want to have, you want to go to the office or a secret vault, and you don't want to know even the vault of it, how many times you've gone there, but you can actually have it too. So this essentially mechanism of zero knowledge proofs is really gives you the quintessential password system that you ever wanted and never dared to ask.
Mm. I'm so glad you used that parable, because when I was first working on trying to understand zero knowledge proofs, I got through like the first sentence of the Wikipedia article about quadratic residue, and then I was completely lost. One sentence, I made it through. But when I started reading the Alibaba's cave parable, I think it's Jean-Jacques Cousteau, to frame that, it gave me an understanding and a way of thinking about it that made it just much more graspable by me. And I think it's such an important thing to do, to try and frame this in a way that you can really understand and envision it without needing to be able to do the math.
Yes. And but by the way, that, believe it or not, comes not necessarily right away. So only when we know something very, very well, we can explain it in simple terms. Yeah. So very often, when I'm asking something, and I must have say, apologize. I say, frankly, I don't know the stuff well enough to explain it right now. Give me a few years, I will be able to find a better explanation, a simpler explanation. Because, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, or is the ultimate state of knowledge, when you know something so well that you can transmit it to others. It does take time. And so therefore, is unfortunate, because this slows us down as humanity in making progress, because we have to simplify the way because I believe that people can understand anything. We are, everybody, but we have not spent enough time to find the sleek explanation that can be comprehended by everybody. But to tell you the truth, this is an effort that takes time. In fact, it may take even more time than to find the original proof.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And it's fascinating. And your MIT colleague, Noam Chomsky, talked about the same thing with regard to linguistics, that we are all born with this capacity to understand language and to know when something is grammatical and when it isn't within our own language. But the ability to describe it analytically, very, very difficult.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
So I said we'd come back to Algorand. I want to talk a little bit about the auction structure, because I think this is really interesting, and talking about the fairness principles and the way that the protocol was distributed. Talk a little bit about that and give people a sense of why it's so important.
So the idea, right, is to have essentially a lottery to select the 1,000 verifier. That's what you mean, right? And to say, how does this random selection really occurs? In Algorand actually occurs in a very unorthodox fashion. The users select themselves based on how many algos they have. So Essentially, think of it, having one algo, and there are 10 billion of them, allows you to operate a slot machine whose lever you can only pull down once, and with two possible outcomes, like in a slot machine. Most of the time, you don't win such a case. I can say anything I want about the next block. Nobody pays attention to what I say because I didn't win the lottery. But the one time when I operate my lever and I win, I get also a winning ticket, namely a mathematical proofs that I won my own lottery. And therefore, what I do, I disseminate on the network both my winning ticket and my opinion about the block, say, up or down. Okay, so the fact that this is a cryptographically fair lottery means that even a nation state with huge computational resources cannot alter minimally the probability of my winning.
Right.
That's good. Okay, so now what do we want here? We want to have the system that is scalable. Okay, how long does it take to lower the lever to play the slot machine? 1 microsecond. And by the way, it's not 1 microsecond per token that you have, but it's 1 microsecond whether you own 1 token or a billion token. Okay, that is pretty fast. Okay, to win or not to win, you decided in a microsecond of computation. But then if I win, what I have to do? Well, you have to distribute over the network, propagate over the network, a short winning ticket and an opinion about the block. Can I do that? Of course you can. Rather than 2 short messages, you can distribute it immediately. So that is damn scalable. So now, is this distributed? Well, that is distributed with a granularity of 1 in 10 billion, because every token has the same ability, the same probability of winning the lottery than anybody else, and you can participate in 1 microsecond independent of how many tokens you have. That is really distributed. You empower everybody who wants to participate to participate. Now the other question is that scalable, yes. Distributed, yes. Is it secure? Well, first of all, one side we just mentioned that is very hard, but I can alter the probability of winning. But if I am a very powerful guy, I don't need to win. I only need to corrupt the winners. So right. I'm to say, well, I understand that this cryptography here, I'm powerless. But here what I'm going to do, I'm going to corrupt the 1,000 winners. But I have a problem. What is my problem? I do not know who the winners will be, because they are the winners of a random lottery. So should I corrupt you in New York? Should I corrupt this lady in Paris? I have no idea. However, once the 1,000 winners come forward and they say, here is my winning ticket, here is my opinion about the block, and say, oh, I know now who the winners are, and I have such tremendous powers that I can corrupt instantaneously any 1,000 people on the planet I want. Zuck, zack, corrupted. But so what? Whatever the winners wanted to say, namely their winning ticket and their opinion about the block, is virally propagated over the network. And I cannot put back what they said back in the bottle no more than our government or anybody could put back in the bottle, say, a message virally propagated by WikiLeaks. So the system is secure because beforehand, I do not know the 1,000 people who are in charge of the next block. And once I know, it's too late to corrupt them. Roughly, that's the idea. So that's why the system is simultaneously secure, scalable, right, and decentralized.
Yeah, because ex post, it's already been broadcast. There's no way to revert it. And this is the power of true randomness.
Yes, that is really the power. And randomness is a tremendous power, by the way. And intuitively, we know that security and randomness is they go together. Because in any game, say poker and things, right? So sometimes you have to use a randomized strategy if you want to protect yourself. Because if everybody knows that whenever I have 3 aces, I do the same thing. I discard whatever 2 cards. I never discard 2 cards. So you need to inject some randomness, because randomness has the following fundamental property. The best way to prevent that people can predict what I'm going to do is to ensure that I myself don't know what I'm going to do. Why? Because I'm going to base my behavior on some random element. That's why intuitively any poker player, any player knows that randomness is part of a scheme. You see a scheme in football, right? The players are going always in random places, a random play every time, because if they do the same thing, they become very predictable. So randomness is always been with us, and it becomes a little bit more pronounced now in this blockchain business, particularly the way Algorand goes about it, because it is really used to the hilt.
Yeah. I know we've kept you longer than an hour, so I want to wrap up soon, as though I could continue talking to you for hours.
It's been a pleasure. I'm game, but I understand that everybody in your audience also have things to do. Yes.
No, you're a busy guy. We have all the time you need. But I wanted to ask you about one final property or series of properties about Algorand, which is the way the auctions work, the Dutch auctions, some of the financial characteristics, and the bonding aspect of it. Could you touch on that briefly?
Oh, yeah. So I really believe in blockchain. And by the way we do it in Algorand, it really matches this very well. So I believe that any auction should be conducted on a blockchain, tell you the truth, provided the blockchain is scalable. Why? Because it's the best guarantee, right? If you do procurement, right? So you are a contractor. Do you feel I've been sidelined? My bid was not taken consideration. If everybody bids on the blockchain, then you see that your bid appears, and know that if the blockchain is decentralized, nobody can prevent your bid to be posted on the blockchain. That's why I don't like 21 people in charge of anything. You want to have a totally distributed system. So my bid is going to be posted no matter what. And I see my bid and the bid of all others. So therefore, with great transparency, everybody can figure out who won and who lost, and be at peace, and how much the people who won had to pay for what they got. Right? So that is a very quintessential thing. One advantage that Algorand has. So in general, if you could do this on a blockchain, is good. What do you want? You want true decentralization, which maps into no bids can be censored from entering posted. You want to have the scalability. You want to allow millions of people from all over the planet to participate. You want security. But I tell you, you also want other things. So many times, the smart contracts that encodes these auctions can be very expensive, and it can actually be very fragile too, as you know. And in Algorand, we have elaborated a bunch of so-called layer 1 smart contracts, which are very special contracts that satisfy 80%, say, of our needs for smart contracts. And we can do them at layer 1, which is the most secure layer in any network, without writing ourselves new code, and essentially without slowing block production. In Algorand, you can run 1,000 layer 1 smart contract at layer 1 in 1 second. So that is pretty impressive. And what can you do at layer 1? You can run an auction. You can do an atomic swap. So in other words, you have something that I want, an asset that I want. I have an asset that you want, and we want to exchange it by a layer one smart contract, essentially simultaneously, without being chaperoned by anybody. And without writing an ad hoc smart contract by asking anybody to write anything for us. And in a few seconds, and at the price of 1 millialgo, we can swap with certainty things. What else can we do? We can do very complicated, dependent, correlated payments. For instance, I should pay $1,000 to you, and if you paid 30 algos to her, if she pays, etc., etc., etc. All this has to be dependent. Well, who should go first? Should I pay first? Well, no, because who knows if you are going to follow through and vice versa. And so in Algorand allows you, in a few seconds, in 1 millialgo price, to push the button knowing that if everybody else complies, all payments are done. And if the others don't comply, my money never leaves de facto my wallet. Okay? So I am very, very much secure in that too. You can do collateralized loans in layer one in Algorand. So I can, I want to borrow money from you, and I post a collateral. And if I don't pay them, whatever we agreed monthly, you can repossess the collateral right away. Now, that sounds bad, repossessing the collateral. Actually, that actually is good to be able to surrender the collateral when I don't pay very easily. Why? Because if I start resisting and you have to go to court to get my collateral, but it can take, months of debate. Meanwhile, my collateral loses value. Think about it as a cargo of wheat if I'm a farmer. And, a month later it's rotten. You can repossess your collateral. But if this junk is yours now, proudly. So what happens in a system like this? In a system like this, what happens is that the people who lend at a very high interest rates. Because they know that there is a lot of risk. But if you know that you can repossess the collateral in seconds, automatically, wow, then you can afford to lend at much lower rate because your risk is way lower. And guess what? If your rate is lower, the probability that I'm going to default is also lower. Everybody benefits, right? And so that's why we believe in Algorand that one of the advantages of our blockchain and doing things so cheaply, so efficiently, and we can be so cheap because we are so efficient, is going to enable growth and prosperity for all. Because that I think it is, the blockchain is going to be a big ally. Because even if you take, a developing country, the main problem they have is access to capital. But if you have access to capital, you will develop, right? So that is the idea. And so we think we can do these things in Algorand. And one particular thing that we do very well and very efficiently in Algorand is somehow tokenization, which essentially is a tremendous tool for liquidity. I really believe that tokenization means that I have an office building, say, I build it, or rather you build it, you want to sell it. It costs $100 million to build it. To whom you sell it? Well, nowadays you sell it to a few local billionaires who specialize in real estate. And by the way, there are so few that essentially they make the price, right? More or less. If you instead you tokenize it, you break it up in, say, 1 million units, then you allow me from Boston, right, to put $1,000 and buy a small piece of your building. So I have a great opportunity to participate directly into such an offering, but otherwise I have no chance before. And you are ecstatic because finally, by having such a broad base of buyers, you are sure to essentially realize the value you deserve, right, for what you built. And so this, I believe, tokenization is, and tokens really will, in my opinion, become the new vehicles of choice for asset management. And we already see that before we had mutual funds, right? And then we had ETFs. And now, in my opinion, we are going to have tokens. And so somehow to launch a new tokens in Algorand, you do it on layer 1 in a few seconds at the cost of $1 million algo, and you're required to keep a balance in whatever wallet, new wallet you create of 1/10 of an algo. That is amazingly cheap, I must say, and it's going to generate a lot of value. And it is no chance that a few days ago, CI, which is the Italian Society of Authors and Editors, has posted an Algorand 4.5 million NFTs, non-fungible tokens, that they created, representing digital rights of 100,000 Italian artists. And, if you do this in another chain to create this non-fungible token, may cost you $100. So this exercise might have costed $500 million, which is some serious chunk of money. And to do it also without writing any additional software, without hiring somebody to write for you a smart contract. That is actually, I think, a very big advantage, because essentially in Algorand is as simple as somehow filling in a form. Who is the issuer? How many units you want to generate ever? How many units you are generating now? Who has clawback rights if something bad happens, etc., etc. You fill the form, a few seconds, 1 million, and you're done. And I think that I am a very big believer in tokenization, and that is going to be actually create a very liquidity, and very often that is going to be a problem in the market that a blockchain, and we in particular, are very capable of addressing effectively.
Yeah, we talk about tokenization, NFTs, the expanding of use cases. One point that we haven't really formally touched on yet is evolvability.
Well, Ash, you are right, because best things last if you're about to finish. Because let me tell you, evolvability to me is the most important aspect of anything in life. Because life itself is about evolvability. Things that do not evolve, let's put it this way, die very soon. They don't last long. I mean, we have the world around us changes, and the protocol, the blockchain protocol, ought to be able to evolve. Not every blockchain agrees, but because they often believe that somehow get pride that whatever the protocol is now is the same protocol that you see tomorrow, in a year, in 10 years, in 100 years. I really believe that the ability to change, if you don't bake it in the protocol from the very beginning, is very hard to put in later. And I believe that evolvability in a consensual way is actually critical to address the needs of our community, not only today, but also tomorrow and beyond. Life is about evolvability. And Algorand has been designed so to evolve. And in fact, actually, we launched in June 2019 to showcase our solution of a trilemma to be decentralized, scalable, and things. We produced more than 9 million blocks. So we have 10 million users. But whatever we started with was then enriched by this layer 1 smart contracts. We had every 6 months a very substantial and consensual absorption of new technology into our blockchain. And I believe that is the recipe for longevity. So otherwise, we slowly, whatever the enterprise is, becomes essentially the equivalent of a dinosaur. And then our environment changes enough that the dinosaurs' bones litter all the way. So we want to, if we want to remain relevant, if we want to remain useful, we have to evolve.
Yeah. Fascinating. Finally, I have to ask you, we were talking a little bit off camera about Sicily. You, of course, are Sicilian. This is the birthplace of Archimedes. I have Sicilian heritage as well. Tell us a little bit about how being Sicilian has influenced your view of cryptography.
Well, has influenced me way beyond cryptography, but we're also in cryptography. So first of all, let's explain. So in Sicily, let's see, we have seen many civilizations, right? Succeeding. The Greeks, the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians, the Romans, the Arabs, the Normans, the French, the Spanish, and so on. We've seen a lot, and each of them left language, culture, art. We have a Greek temple, so we have Arab Norman cathedrals, which is a fantastic style unique to Sicily because of these two civilizations were just next to each other. As has been, so you ought to believe that we are a soup, which isn't a large soup, is an international effort. And, Sicily is the center of the Mediterranean, so close to many civilizations is natural, but it's really seeing that happens. And another thing that influences me is that I noticed that I was living when traveling wasn't easy, and I was born in Palermo, but I lived in Agrigento for a few years, which is the home of some fantastic Greek temples. Fantastic. Even I don't want to say better than Greece, it sounds bad, but I'm saying some of the best Greek temples ever. You can find them in Agrigento, which was originally Akragas, a very old city. And I saw, travelers from all over the world line up to see the temples. So it really gave me the idea, I say, hey, gee, if in our lives we do something so beautiful, people will continue to appreciate thousands of years later. And that is something really that stuck with me. But of course, anytime that you have so many civilization. Initially, there is the part of conquest is actually not exactly friendly. So there is a natural thing to say, you never find a better friend than a Sicilian friend, but you find, a kind of caution attitude to begin with, and to say the better thing is that I don't reveal myself right away. Right, and then only later you actually open up, and that to me, in the world of cryptography, speaking about privacy or helping to create a sense of privacy to a Sicilian comes natural. But the goal of this ability to keep private what we want to keep private, and to still be able to interact, is really expanding our ability to interact. In my opinion. So security is a way to interact more, not less. And that is my Sicilian lesson. It has never left me. And every time that I go to Italy, I really treasure my time that I spend on the island.
Marvelous. Professor, thank you so much for joining us.
Very welcome, Ash. And thanks to you, and thank you to your audience for the kind of opportunity.
It was a great pleasure. Thanks for watching, everyone.